Jake Morrison sat in the cold marble chair and watched the alien delegates argue about his people like they were not even there. The Galactic Council chamber stretched up toward a glass dome that showed the stars beyond, but Jake only saw the same old scene playing out again. Humans asking for help, aliens saying no. The Veltar representative stood at the center podium, his blue skin shining under the bright lights. His voice carried across the huge room as he spoke about efficiency and proper resource allocation. Jake had heard these words before. They always meant the same thing: no help for humans. The refugee crisis in the Outer Rim requires careful management, the Veltar said, his four arms gesturing smoothly. We cannot simply relocate these populations without proper planning. The human proposal lacks sophistication. Jake looked down at his tablet. The human proposal was 300 pages long. It included detailed plans for temporary housing, food distribution, and medical care. His team had worked for 6 months on it, but the Veltar called it unsophisticated because it came from humans, the crystalline delegate chimed in with sounds that the translator turned into words. The humans mean well, but they do not understand the complex nature of galactic politics. Perhaps they should focus on what they do best. Jake knew what that meant: fix things, build things, clean up messes that other species made. That was what humans did best, according to the Council. They were the galaxy's handymen. In the back of the chamber, Captain Lisa Hayes watched the proceedings through a communication link. She stood on the bridge of the Aurora, her rescue ship currently racing toward the Kepler sector. A mining station was falling apart and people were dying. The nearest alien patrol ships had been contacted hours ago, but they were all busy with trade negotiations. Captain, her engineer called from across the bridge. We're getting more distress signals. That station is breaking up fast. Lisa nodded and kept watching Jake on the screen. She wanted to see if the Council would finally approve emergency assistance protocols. The humans had been asking for 2 years to set up proper rescue coordination. Every time the aliens said they would think about it, all ships prepare for emergency docking, Lisa ordered. We're going in alone again. The Aurora crew moved with practiced efficiency. They had done this dance many times before. Humans rushing to save lives while aliens held meetings about whether saving lives was cost-effective on Earth. Director Ryan Cooper sat in his office reviewing reports from human colonies scattered across the galaxy. Each report told the same story: humans building infrastructure, humans responding to emergencies, humans solving problems that other species created but would not fix. New Portland colony had built a water purification system for their Zephyrian neighbors. The Zephyrians had not asked for it. They had not paid for it. They had simply expected it after their own system failed. Now they complained that the human-built system was too efficient and made their own engineers look bad. The Kepler research station had been running for 20 years on human-designed fusion reactors. The station housed scientists from 12 different species. When the reactors needed maintenance, the alien scientists sent messages to Earth asking for help. They never offered to learn how to fix the reactors themselves. The Outer Rim colonies depended on human-maintained hyperspace beacons for navigation. Without these beacons, trade ships would take months to cross distances they currently covered in days. The humans had built and maintained these beacons for free for 50 years. The aliens had voted down every proposal to share maintenance costs. Ryan rubbed his tired eyes and looked out his window at the city below. Humans had spent 5 decades trying to prove they belonged in the galaxy. They had given their best minds, their best technology, and their best intentions. In return, they had been treated like useful servants. Back in the council chamber, the debate continued. The Nexari delegate stood up, his tall frame casting shadows across the floor. The human proposal assumes we can simply move populations without considering cultural implications. These refugees have specific needs that humans cannot understand. Jake finally stood up. The chamber grew quiet. Humans rarely spoke unless asked direct questions. Ambassador Morrison, the council leader said, "Do you wish to address the chamber?" "I do," Jake said simply. He walked to the center podium where the Veltar had been standing. The marble floor felt cold under his feet. For 50 years, my people have served this council faithfully. We have built your stations, maintained your equipment, and responded to your emergencies. We have asked for nothing in return except to be treated as equals. The chamber remained silent. Jake could hear the soft hum of the life support systems. Human-designed life support systems that kept this very chamber habitable for species that could not survive in each other's natural environments. Today, you have rejected our proposal to help refugees who are dying in space. You have called our plans unsophisticated. You have suggested we should focus on what we do best. Jake paused and looked around the chamber. You are right. We should focus on what we do best. The Zephyrian delegate leaned forward. And what is that, Ambassador? Taking care of our own people, Jake said quietly. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a sealed document. The paper was old-fashioned, printed on earth trees, signed with human ink. He placed it on the podium. This is humanity's formal withdrawal from all galactic treaties and agreements. We are recalling our ambassadors, our engineers, our doctors, and our teachers. We are closing our research stations and shutting down our maintenance operations. We are done. The chamber erupted in surprised voices. The translator systems could not keep up with all the different languages being spoken at once. But Jake heard one phrase repeated in many different ways. You cannot do this. We can, Jake said, and we are. He picked up the document and walked toward the exit. At the chamber doors, he turned back one last time. We came to the stars seeking friendship and found only exploitation. We offered our hands in partnership and were given tools to hold instead. Very well, we will no longer impose our presence upon your great civilization. The doors closed behind him with a soft hiss. The chamber fell into complete silence for the first time in centuries. In space, Captain Lisa Hayes and her crew pulled the last survivors from the collapsing mining station. The saved miners thanked them briefly before joining their own species groups. None of them asked why the Aurora was the only ship that had come to help. They would learn soon enough. Captain Ben Parker stood on the loading dock of New Portland Colony and watched his crew dismantle the fusion reactor. The massive machine had powered the entire settlement for 15 years. Now it was being carefully taken apart, piece by piece, and loaded onto transport ships. Are you sure about this, Captain? Asked Lieutenant Kate Morris, his chief engineer. This reactor powers half the Zephyrian settlements, too. Ben nodded and checked his tablet. The withdrawal orders were clear. Everything built by humans, maintained by humans, or designed by humans was to be removed. Nothing was to be left behind. That could benefit the species that had treated humanity like servants. The Zephyrians wanted administrative control of our colony, Ben said. They can have the buildings, but the technology goes with us. Around the colony, similar scenes played out. Human families packed their belongings while work crews dismantled water treatment plants, communication arrays, and atmospheric processors. The Zephyrians watched from a distance, confused expressions on their faces. A Zephyrian official approached Ben. His name was Coordinator Zeth, and he had been the one to announce the annexation of New Portland 3 months ago. Captain Parker, Zeth said, his voice carrying the usual tone of authority that Zephyrians used with humans. This dismantling is unnecessary. The infrastructure belongs to the colony. No, Ben said without looking up from his tablet. The infrastructure belongs to the people who built it. We built it, we are taking it. But the colony cannot function without power, Zeth protested. The water systems, the air recycling, the communication networks, they all depend on this equipment. Ben finally looked at the Zephyrian. Then you should have thought of that before you decided humans were not capable of governing themselves. The transport ships filled quickly. The fusion reactor components went into specially designed containers. The water purification systems were broken down into portable units. Even the medical equipment from the hospital was carefully packed and labeled. Dr. Amanda Price supervised the medical evacuation from the Joint Research Station on Altair 7 for 20 years. She had worked alongside alien scientists, sharing human medical knowledge freely. The research station had become the galaxy's leading center for cross-species medicine. Dr. Price, called Dr. Vellner, a crystalline researcher she had worked with for over a decade. Surely the medical research can continue. This work belongs to all species, Amanda continued packing her equipment. The research belongs to the researchers who conducted it. Since the humans are leaving, the research leaves with them. But the treatments we developed together, Vellner protested. The cures for the Centauri fever, the bone rot disease, the neural parasites, millions of lives depend on this knowledge. Then perhaps the Galactic Council should have considered that before they decided human contributions were not sophisticated. Enough for serious consideration, Amanda said. She sealed the last container of medical supplies and picked up her personal research notes. 20 years of work, packed into a single briefcase. The aliens had always assumed this knowledge would remain available to them forever. The research station's alien staff watched helplessly as the human medical team departed. They had never bothered to learn the human medical techniques. They had simply relied on human doctors to handle the difficult cases in the shipping lanes between star systems. The effects of the withdrawal began to show. Commander Steve Walsh shut down the hyperspace beacon maintenance station in the Cygnus sector. The station had monitored and adjusted 43 navigation beacons across 12 star systems. Final systems check complete, reported his operations officer. All human personnel have been evacuated. The automated systems are shutting down. Steve looked at the massive display showing hyperspace traffic patterns. Thousands of ships use these lanes every day. Without constant maintenance, the beacons would start to drift. Navigation errors would increase. What had been safe, efficient travel would become dangerous guesswork. Sir, his communications officer said, we are receiving multiple requests from trade vessels asking for navigation updates. Send them the standard response, Steve said. Human navigation services are no longer available. Contact your local authorities for assistance. The trade ships had always taken the navigation updates for granted. They had never asked how the beacons worked or who maintained them. They had simply expected the information to be there when they needed it. Back on Earth, Director Ryan Cooper met with the returning colonists and researchers. The reports were the same from every human settlement and facility. The aliens had watched the withdrawals with growing alarm, but none had offered to negotiate or compromise. They still do not understand, said Jake Morrison, who had returned from the Galactic Council. They think this is a negotiating tactic. They believe we will return once we have made our point, Ryan nodded. How long do you think it will take for them to realize we are serious? When their ships start getting lost in hyperspace, Jake said. When their power systems fail, when their sick start dying from diseases we used to cure, when their trade networks collapse. Dr. Amanda Price entered the briefing room and set down her briefcase. The medical withdrawal is complete. Every human doctor, nurse, and medical researcher has been recalled. We took all our research data and treatment protocols with us. What about the alien medical staff? Ryan asked. They are competent with their own species, Amanda said. But they never learned cross-species medicine. They always called us when they had a patient from a different species. Now they will have to figure it out themselves. The withdrawal was proceeding faster than anyone had expected. Humans had been integrated into every aspect of galactic civilization, but they had always remained separate. When they left, they took their knowledge with them. Captain Ben Parker sent his final report from New Portland. The colony buildings stood empty, with no power, no water, and no communications. The Zephyrians had moved in, but they could not make anything work. They had never learned how to operate the systems they had taken over. New Portland evacuation complete, he reported. All human personnel and equipment have been successfully relocated. The colony is now under full Zephyrian control. He did not mention that Zephyrian control meant nothing without the technology to support it. The Zephyrians would learn that lesson soon enough. Across the galaxy, the pattern repeated. Human-built infrastructure fell silent. Human-maintained systems began to fail. Human-provided services simply stopped. The silence was not empty. It was the silence of a species that had finally decided to stop giving freely to those who would never give back. The first solar flare hit the crystalline collective's home system without warning. On their main world, billions of crystal beings suddenly found themselves cut off from each other as their communication network burned out. The flare was massive, but it was not unexpected. Human monitoring stations had been predicting such events for 50 years. Engineer Danny Clark watched the reports come in from his new office on Mars. The crystalline collective was asking for help, but their messages were not reaching anyone. Their own communication systems were down, and they had no way to repair them. They never asked how we predicted the solar flares, Danny said to his assistant. They just expected us to warn them when the next one was coming. His assistant pulled up the old files. We sent them 3 warnings about this flare. The last one was sent 2 weeks ago, just before we shut down the monitoring stations. Danny nodded. The humans had followed proper procedures. They had warned everyone they could before closing their operations. But the warnings had been ignored. Filed away with all the other routine messages that humans sent, the crystalline collective had 12 worlds in their system. All of them were now isolated, unable to communicate with each other or the outside galaxy. Their entire civilization depended on constant communication through their crystal networks. Without it, they were like a person who had suddenly gone. Deaf and blind on the trade routes, ships were getting lost. The Galactic Trade Federation had called an emergency meeting to discuss the navigation problems. Their ships were taking 3 times longer to reach their destinations, and some were not arriving at all. Captain Ron Mitchell sat in his office on Luna and read the reports. His old job had been maintaining the hyperspace beacon network. Now, he worked for the Human Colonial Authority, helping to establish new settlements far from alien space. The Andorian Express is 2 weeks overdue, his secretary reported. The Veltar cargo hauler profit margin has been missing for 10 days. 3 more ships have reported navigation system failures. Ron was not surprised. The hyperspace beacons were still working, but they were slowly drifting out of position. Without constant adjustments, they gave ships the wrong information. A navigation error in hyperspace could send a ship anywhere in the galaxy or nowhere at all. Are we responding to any distress calls? His secretary asked. No, Ron said. We are not involved in galactic shipping anymore. They wanted to handle their own affairs. Now they can handle their own problems. The Veltar Banking Consortium was facing a different kind of crisis. Their computer systems were failing, and they did not know why. The quantum encryption codes that protected their transactions were breaking down. Money was disappearing from accounts. Trade agreements were being altered by unknown hackers. President Kelly Rogers received a report about the banking crisis during her morning briefing. The Veltar had built their entire economy on a computer system designed by human programmers. The humans had maintained the security codes, updated the software, and protected the system from attacks. How long before their entire economy collapses? Kelly asked her economic advisor. The banking system is already failing, the advisor replied. Their currency is losing value every day. Trade partners are refusing to accept Veltar credits. They may have to return to bartering within a month. Kelly looked out the window of her office in Luna City. Earth hung in the sky like a blue marble, peaceful and beautiful. Humanity had returned home, and home was prospering. The human colonies were thriving without the need to support alien civilizations on the former research station at Altair 7. The alien scientists were struggling with a medical emergency. A new disease had appeared, something that affected multiple species. Without human doctors, they had no idea how to treat it. Dr. Vellner, the crystalline researcher, tried to contact Earth for help. His messages went unanswered. The human medical database had been removed from the station's computers. All the research notes were gone. 20 years of medical knowledge had vanished with the human staff. We need to develop a cross-species treatment, Vellner told his team. The disease is spreading to the Nexari and the Zephyrians. Our usual medicines are not working. The problem was that cross-species medicine required understanding how different biology worked together. The humans had spent decades learning these connections. The alien scientists had never bothered to study it. They had always called the human doctors when they had a problem. The Galactic Council held an emergency session to discuss what they were calling the infrastructure crisis. Representatives from dozens of species gathered in the Great Chamber on Nexus Prime. The chamber itself was having problems. The life support systems were working poorly without human maintenance. The Veltar representative stood to address the council. We are facing system failures across multiple sectors. Trade routes are unreliable. Medical systems are failing. Communication networks are down. We need to contact the humans immediately. The humans have made their position clear, replied the Nexari delegate. They are not responding to our communications. They have withdrawn from all galactic affairs. Then, we must send a delegation to Earth, the Veltar said. We can negotiate new terms. Perhaps offer them better representation in the council. The crystalline delegate's voice chimed with desperation. Our entire home system is cut off. We have no way to coordinate relief efforts. Billions of our people are suffering. The council chamber fell silent. For the first time in centuries, they had problems they could not solve by passing laws or making agreements. They needed technical expertise, medical knowledge, and engineering skills. They needed humans, but the humans were not listening. On Earth, the human leaders met to discuss the reports coming in from across the galaxy. The aliens were finally starting to understand what they had lost, but it was too late. The damage was already spreading. The Outer Rim colonies are reporting food shortages, reported the Secretary of Colonial Affairs. The trade routes are too unreliable to maintain regular supply shipments. The Zephyrian Empire is asking for engineering assistance, added the Secretary of Foreign Affairs. Their infrastructure is failing without human maintenance. The Crystalline Collective is offering to pay for communication system repairs, said the Secretary of Technology. They are willing to give us exclusive trading rights in their territory. Jake Morrison, now serving as Earth Secretary of Alien Affairs, listened to the reports with a calm expression. What are our instructions regarding these requests? The same as always, President Rogers said. We are not involved in galactic affairs. We wish all species well, but we cannot provide assistance. The room fell quiet. Outside, human children played in the parks of Luna City, safe and happy. The human colonies were growing stronger every day. Earth's population was healthier and more prosperous than it had been in decades. Humanity had learned to take care of itself. The galaxy would have to learn the same lesson or face the consequences of its own arrogance, the silence from human. Space was not empty. It was the sound of a species that had finally decided its own welfare was more important than the ungrateful galaxy that had used them for 50 years. Captain Ron Mitchell stood on the bridge of the human vessel Defiant and watched the Zephyrian ship float helplessly in space. The cruiser Dominance had been one of the most feared warships in the galaxy. Now it drifted like a broken toy, its crew trapped inside. Captain, his communications officer reported, the Zephyrian ship is broadcasting a distress signal. They attempted a hyperspace jump to Earth, but their navigation system failed. They are lost. Ron looked at the massive warship through the viewscreen. A year ago, that same ship had been part of the fleet that annexed New Portland. The Zephyrians had been so confident then, so sure of their right to rule over human colonies. Are they requesting assistance? Ron asked. Yes, sir. They are asking for navigation coordinates to return to Zephyrian space. They say their jump drive is damaged and they cannot calculate a safe route home. Ron nodded. The new protocols were clear. Human ships were to maintain communication silence when encountering alien vessels in distress. No assistance was to be provided under any circumstances. Log the encounter and continue on our course, Ron ordered. We have our own people to protect. The Defiant moved past the disabled warship without stopping. The Zephyrian distress calls continued to echo across space, but no human ship answered. The crew that had once expected humans to serve them now found themselves alone in the dark. On the core worlds, the plague was spreading faster than anyone had expected. The Galactic Medical Authority had declared a state of emergency, but they had no way to contain the disease. Without human doctors and human research, they were fighting blind. Dr. Sarah Blake read the medical reports from her laboratory on Europa. The plague had started small, affecting only a few hundred individuals across different species. But it was spreading through the trade routes, carried by ships that could no longer navigate safely. The mortality rate is climbing, her assistant reported. The alien medical centers are overwhelmed. They have no effective treatments for cross-species infections. Sarah had spent 15 years developing treatments for diseases that affected multiple species. Her research had saved millions of lives across the galaxy. Now that research was locked away in human databases, unavailable to the aliens who needed it most. Are they still requesting access to our medical files? Sarah asked. Every day, her assistant replied. The Crystalline Collective has offered to trade their entire crystal technology database for just our basic disease treatment protocols. Sarah turned back to her work. She was developing new medicines now, but only for humans. The aliens had made their choice when they decided human medical knowledge was not sophisticated enough for galactic standards. The Outer Rim colonies were beginning to collapse. Without reliable trade routes, they could not get the supplies they needed to survive. The Nexari had already abandoned 3 of their settlements, loading their people onto ships and hoping to find safe passage to the core worlds. Engineer Nancy Taylor received 15 more requests for assistance that morning. Her communication array was filled with desperate messages from failing star systems. Power grids were down. Water treatment plants had stopped working. Life support systems were failing on space stations across the galaxy. The Altarian system is reporting complete infrastructure failure, her assistant said. They are asking for emergency engineering support. They say they will pay any price. Nancy looked at the message queue. Hundreds of requests, all marked urgent, all asking for the same thing. Human expertise to fix problems that humans had been preventing for 50 years. File it with the others, Nancy said, and send the standard response. The standard response was short and simple. Human engineering services were no longer available. Contact your local authorities for assistance. The message was polite but final. The Crystalline Collective's trade empire was crumbling. Their inability to predict solar weather had cost them 12 major cargo fleets in the past month. Each fleet represented billions of credits in lost goods, and hundreds of lives. Fleet Commander Crystal Song of Stars watched her people abandon another space station. The solar flare warnings had stopped coming, and her ships were flying blind through dangerous space. Without human monitoring stations, they had no way to know when the next solar storm would hit. Commander, her aide reported, 3 more trade partners have canceled their contracts. They say our shipping is too unreliable. Crystal Song of Stars had been one of the council members who voted to limit human participation in galactic affairs. She had believed that humans were useful servants. Nothing more. Now she watched her civilization fall apart and understood. Too late what humans had really been. The Veltar Banking Consortium finally collapsed completely. Their computer systems had been compromised so thoroughly that they could no longer conduct any business. Trillions of credits had vanished into untraceable accounts. The galactic economy was in freefall on Earth. President Kelly Rogers met with her cabinet to discuss the reports from across the galaxy. The aliens were suffering, but humanity was prospering. The human colonies were growing stronger every day, freed from the burden of supporting ungrateful alien civilizations. The Galactic Council has sent another delegation to the Sol System, reported the Secretary of Foreign Affairs. They are requesting permission to land on Earth for emergency negotiations. What is our response? Kelly asked. The same as always, replied Jake Morrison. We are not interested in galactic affairs. We wish them well, but we cannot provide assistance. The cabinet meeting continued with reports of human progress. New colonies were being established in previously unexplored systems. Human technology was advancing rapidly without the need to share discoveries with alien species. Earth's population was healthier and happier than it had been in generations. Outside the meeting room, human children learned about the stars in their schools, but they learned about human stars now, human colonies and human achievements. The galaxy beyond human space was becoming a cautionary tale about the dangers of taking good neighbors for granted. The Galactic Council chambers on Nexus Prime were half empty. Many species could no longer afford to maintain representatives. At the capital, their resources were consumed by the constant crises that plagued their home systems. Those who remained spoke in hushed tones about the human situation. They had tried everything: offers of technology, territorial concessions, even formal apologies. But the humans remained silent, focused on their own space and their own people. The galaxy that had once been united under alien rule was breaking apart. Without human infrastructure to hold it together, the Great Alliance was becoming a collection of struggling worlds, each fighting for survival in an increasingly hostile universe. The silence from human space was no longer just the absence of communication. It was the sound of a species that had learned to value itself above those who had never valued it at all. The Galactic Council chambers on Nexus Prime were almost empty. Only 12 delegates remained from the original 1,000-member assembly. Most species could no longer afford to send representatives to the capital. Their worlds were too busy trying to survive the collapse of galactic civilization. Council leader X9 looked around the vast chamber and remembered when it had been filled with delegates from across the galaxy. Now the empty seats stood like monuments to a failed empire. The life support systems wheezed and groaned, barely keeping the chamber habitable without human maintenance. "We need to face the truth," X9 said to the remaining delegates. "Our civilization is ending. Without human support, we cannot maintain what we built." The Veltar representative, one of the few who still attended council meetings, stood up. Slowly, his once proud species had been reduced to a handful of functioning worlds. "Perhaps it is time to consider unconditional surrender to the humans. They might show mercy." "The humans are not responding to any communications," replied the Nexari delegate. "They have made their position clear. We are no longer their concern." Admiral Gary Brooks stood on the observation deck of the human space station Guardian, watching the steady stream of refugee ships approaching the borders of human space. The ships came from every corner of the galaxy, carrying the survivors of collapsed civilizations. "Sir," his aide reported, "we have detected 47 more refugee vessels in the past hour. They are requesting permission to enter human space." Gary nodded. The same scene played out every day. Ships filled with desperate aliens, fleeing the chaos that had consumed their home systems. They came seeking the safety and prosperity that humans had built for themselves. "Standard response," Gary ordered. "We sympathize with their situation, but human space is reserved for humans. They are welcome to establish refugee camps outside our borders, but they cannot enter our territory." The refugee ships continued to arrive. Some carried the survivors of the Crystalline Collective, their crystal forms dim and cracked from malnutrition. Others held Zephyrian nobles who had once ruled over human colonies. Now they begged for scraps at the edges of human space on Earth. Jake Morrison received the daily reports from the border stations. The alien refugees were multiplying rapidly, creating massive camps in the neutral zones around human space. Disease was spreading through the camps. Food was running short. The aliens were dying in numbers that would have horrified humanity just a few years ago. "The Veltar have sent another delegation," his assistant reported. "They are offering to surrender their entire remaining territory to human control. They just want food and medical supplies." Jake looked at the offer. The Veltar territory included some of the richest mining worlds in the galaxy. It was worth more than Earth's entire economic output, but Jake's answer was the same as always. "Send the standard response," he said. "We appreciate their offer, but we are not interested in expanding beyond human space. We wish them well in their efforts to rebuild their civilization." The assistant paused. Sir, they are also offering to serve as permanent workers in human colonies. They say they will accept any conditions. Jake shook his head. The same response. We are not interested in galactic affairs. In the ruins of New Portland, the Zephyrians had finally abandoned their attempt to maintain the colony. The buildings stood empty, their power systems dead, their water systems dry. The Zephyrians had tried for 2 years to make the colony work, but they could not operate the human-built infrastructure. Captain Ben Parker received a report about the abandoned colony from one of his survey teams. The Zephyrians had left behind everything, including personal belongings and valuable equipment. They had simply walked away when they realized they could not make the colony function. Should we reclaim the colony? His operations officer asked. No, Ben replied. We have enough colonies of our own. Let it stand as a monument to alien arrogance. The disease that had started in the research stations was now spreading across the galaxy unchecked. Without human medical knowledge, the aliens had no way to contain it. Entire species were facing extinction from illnesses that humans could have cured easily. Dr. Sarah Blake watched the medical reports from her laboratory and felt a mixture of sadness and satisfaction. She had the knowledge to save millions of lives. But she also remembered how alien medical authorities had dismissed human doctors as unsophisticated. The plague has reached the core worlds, her assistant reported. The Nexari home system is reporting a 90% infection rate. They are asking for any medical assistance, even basic treatment protocols. Sarah turned back to her research. She was working on new medicines for human colonies, treatments that would keep her own people healthy and strong. The aliens would have to solve their own medical problems, just as they had insisted they could do. President Kelly Rogers stood in her office on Luna City and looked out at the Earth spinning slowly in space. The blue and green planet was more beautiful than ever, its skies clear, its oceans clean. Humanity had learned to take care of its home. The final refugee ship has been turned away from the Sol system, reported her Secretary of Defense. They were carrying the last survivors of the Altarian civilization. About 3,000 individuals, Kelly nodded. The Altarians had been among the most vocal critics of human participation in galactic affairs. They had called humans primitive and short-sighted. Now their civilization was extinct, and the survivors were begging for shelter in human space. Send them coordinates for the refugee camps at the border, Kelly said. They can join the others. The refugee camps had grown into cities, then into small nations. Millions of aliens lived in the zones between human space and the collapsed galactic territories. They survived on charity from human organizations and the occasional supply dropped from human ships, but they were not allowed into human space. That privilege was reserved for humans alone. A young girl named Emma Chun sat in her classroom on Mars and listened to her teacher explain galactic history. The teacher showed pictures of the Great Council chambers, the massive space stations, the interstellar trade routes that had once connected thousands of worlds. What happened to all the aliens? Emma asked. They forgot that friendship must be mutual, the teacher replied. They took our help for granted and treated us like servants. When we stopped helping them, they could not help themselves. Emma raised her hand again. Will we ever help them again? The teacher smiled sadly. Perhaps someday their children will be wiser than their parents. Perhaps they will understand that true partnership requires respect for all participants. But that day has not come yet. Outside the classroom window, the stars shone brightly in the Martian sky. They were beautiful stars, but they were not friendly stars. They were the stars of a galaxy that had learned too late the value of those who had served it faithfully. The silence from human space was complete now. It was not the silence of anger or revenge. It was the silence of a species that had found peace in caring for its own people, prosperity in focusing on its own future, and wisdom in understanding that some lessons can only be learned through loss. The galaxy had paid dearly for its arrogance. And in the quiet spaces between the stars, humanity continued to grow and thrive, no longer burdened by the weight of ungrateful civilizations that had never learned to say thank you.